So we're holding again Pirkei Avos, and we're holding by Mishneh Gimel. In Perek Mishneh Gimel, where we are speaking to, we had Rabbi Yehuda and then his son Rabbi Gamliel, who again reiterated his father's way of life, which was we should take the middle road. We shouldn't do anything that's outlandish, and so that we should not look odd, and makes a Kiddush Hashem when we do that. So he a little bit continues on this path, and he says like this. Excuse me a moment. Oh goodness. Here we go. Says Heve, that's Mishneh Gimel now in Perek Beis. Hevu Zehirim Barashis. Barashus. Rashus is generally the term Rashus is a ruler. We have to be careful, like I would have said, come up once before in the previous Perek, that people in power, politicians, kings, and in the past or even today, and anybody that has power, you should be very careful. He's giving you advice, being that at that point, Klal Yisrael was in Golus, but he was the leader of Klal Yisrael, but he was still under the auspices of a different kingdom, of the Bavliim in Iraq, where they lived. So he says, you should be careful in getting very too close to the rulers of the country, because she'ein mekarvin lo la'adam elo letzarich atzman. Politicians, anybody in power, as we said once before, they only worry about their own benefit. They want to stay in power, and they're going to do anything they need to stay in power. Over here, we're talking about even if he's a king, which he is in power, he's going to be in power, his children are probably going to take over. And there's always going to be somebody that is the leader of the community who gets close to the king so that he should help the community. So he says, don't get overly close. Try to stay away, keep a little bit of a distance, because then in any time they can possibly do something eventually, because there's always going to be an anti-Semite, even if he loves you, even if the king, the Rambam was the doctor of the king in Egypt, and he was the right-hand man, and he trusted him implicitly. And there's so many stories later where he suffered because people in power that were in Egypt didn't like the fact that there was a Jew that had so much power. So they used to malign him to the king, and he suffered many, many times. Nirinkai Haven, because the king, when he needs you, he's going to become your best friend. He's going to be friendly. Anything I can do for you, how much can I pay you, what do you want? But that is only b'shas hana'asan, when it benefits for themselves. When they have benefit out of doing something good, they're going to do it. But you're going to find that if Chas v'Shalom, this Jew specifically, is going to need him for a specific thing that doesn't benefit the king is going to basically ignore him. Whatever he did before is not going to have the same effect. That is the basic meaning of this Mishnah. There was actually, during the Second World War, there was a meeting with Rabbi Aaron Kotler and Mike Tress. Now, Mike Tress was the liaison for the Jewish community with the politicians. And we used to have a DA in New York. His name was Bob Morgenthau. His father, this Morgenthau's father, he was a Secretary of State during the Second World War. And he's a Jewish fella. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler went with Mike Tress there so that they should do something for Bnei Yisrael that was suffering in Europe. And he said, and how to do also, if they were able to get enough money to ransom Jews, then they were able to bring Jews. The Nazis were desperate for money, so they helped them. The money would help them, and they basically were using the Jews as leverage. So they went to him in a meeting in Washington, And Reb Aaron spoke in Yiddish because he didn't speak English, and Mike Tress was the translator. And Bob Morgenthau didn't want to get involved. He says they can't do it, it'll look bad, every excuse in the book. So Baron Kotler tells him something to the effect of what Mordechai told Esther. Listen to me. If you think that Hashem put you in this position not for this moment, then you're making a huge mistake, and you're going to end up losing this position, and you're going to lose in not a good way. It was like a threat almost. So Mike Tress, when he spoke to Morgenthau, he didn't want to say it with that energy that Baron Kotler said it, because he was a little bit nervous. He was talking to the Secretary of State. So he watered it down a little bit. The rabbi says that you really were designated for this moment to be DA, to be a Secretary of State, because we need you. The Jewish people need you. But Baron Kotler realized that he didn't say it with the same oomph. So he tells it to him in strong. I want you to repeat the exact words that he told me, that I told you, and with the same strength. And he did, because then he realized. So Morgenthau put his head down and started to a little bit. There was tears in his eyes, and he got up and he did. That's when he needed him. He was a man in power. He didn't want to lose that Secretary of State. He was. We are in Golos, even if he's Secretary of State, but he was Jewish, and unfortunately, on his own will, he wouldn't help. But being threatened, and he said, "Listen to me. I'm telling you right now. If you don't help," Baron Kotler had a little bit of a tough personality. He said, "You're going to lose your position in not a good way." So he obviously felt a little bit threatened, and he listened. But during the Second World War, there was also in the concentration camp, unfortunately, we had what they called kapos. Kapos were Jewish people who were, a lot of them were the rough guys, the guys who weren't the yeshiva type of guys. They didn't have that Jewish personality in a way, and they mistreated a lot of Yidden. There was a lot of kapos were very good, but many of them mistreated them. And there was one capo, his name was Willie, and this Willie was known as a very, very bad capo. He used to beat the Jews. He mastered them to the Nazis. And what happened was, there was one of the people in Bergen-Belsen. His name was he was a Rav. He made it through the war. And he was very big. He was in Chicago. He was the vice Rebbe. He was very big in Mikvois. He knew all the halachas of Mikvois. And the vice Rebbe was a grandson of the Satmar Rebbe's grandfather. So he was on the same level of age, maybe, as the Satmar Rebbe of Yoel, the one that made it through the war. And by his wedding, he got from his grandfather. His grandfather used to give always his talis. Every grandchild that got married, that previous Satmar Rebbe used to give his grandchild his talis, and he used to buy himself a new talis. And the next one, it was like a schus to get the Zayda, the Rebbe's, this big Satmar Rebbe's talis. It was you daven in it. You had the how many tears he had with his tefillahs, and that went through that the way he used to daven. And you wanted to have that talis. They all looked forward to it. When the Nazis came and took him away, the only thing he grabbed was the talis. And he hid it under his clothing. And he took it with him into concentration camp, and he realized he can't hide it. A talis is too big. So he cut it down into the size of tzitzis, and he wore them as tzitzis under his concentration camp clothing. And he hid it literally almost to the very end. He was able to get away with it. And one day, this capo comes in, this Willie comes in, and he notices something under his thing, and he says, "What do you got there?" And he says, "Nothing." And he grabs him, and he whoops, and he rips it out. So there's a few versions of the story, but one of the versions was, he tells him, "I can't believe, after seeing what's going on over here, that you actually believe in Hashem. I can't believe it. It doesn't even make sense. Look what's going on. You're getting killed. We're getting this. We're getting that." He says, "I'm in power. It's the only reason I'm getting what I'm getting. I'm able to eat some food. But you're nobody here. You still believe in Hashem?" So he says, "Let me tell you something." And he says, "If you don't tell me a good reason, I'm going to give you over to the Nazis and tell them that you have this, and you're going to get killed." He tells him, you don't understand, he says. A doctor goes and has surgery. When a doctor has surgery, makes surgery on somebody, open heart surgery. So what does he have to do for open heart surgery? He has to cut through the top layer of skin, take actual saw and cut through the ribs, literally break through the ribs, and again, cut through till he reaches the heart. The place, he suction out so much blood, it's incredible. And meanwhile, what happened was there was this fellow, this shoemaker, that said, "I want to watch my brother having surgery. I'm very nervous about this doctor." So the doctor said, "Okay." When he saw what the doctor was doing, he says, "You're ruining my brother. You're breaking his ribs. You're cutting through things. Look at all the blood. You're killing him." And the doctor says, "Please do me a favor. I'll explain it all to you later, but you have to leave." And he explains like this: in order to get to the heart, sometimes you have to go through a lot of bleeding. It's not possible to get to the heart without breaking the ribs. He says, Hashem is doing something for us, and it's a benefit for us. We don't understand it at this point, but at the end of the day, it's a benefit for us. And he let him go because of that. But what happened was he took this talos cotton, this tzitzis, and he threw it into the fire and burnt it. Right after that, the Nazis took the people from that area and put them on a train and wanted to bring them in deeper into Germany because the Russians were coming and they didn't want them to be freed. What happened was the place was jammed, and Willie was in the same car as the Weizsäcker Rebbe and his father. His father was an older man, and he leaned his head on the Weizsäcker Rebbe that was standing shoulder to shoulder on his son's shoulder so that he can rest. And after about 7, 8, 9 hours like this, he tells his father, "I can't take it anymore. I don't, there's too much pressure on my shoulder. Please move. Just give me a little bit of time to rest, and then you can put it back." So his father takes his head off the shoulder, and at that moment, American planes went and they strafed, they bombed, they shot the bullets at the plane. They didn't know that at the train. They didn't know that the train was carrying a human cargo. They thought it was a train going into Germany with supplies. And a bullet went right between father and son, where they had put together, where he separated his head, and went straight into Willie. And Willie was paralyzed with those bullets, and he was begging for help, and nobody helped him. So we see somebody, the Rebbeinu Shalom, he gives them power. But it only gets the power as long as you have the power. In fact, I'm going to say the next Mishneh, because the next Mishneh is a little bit tied into this Mishneh, and it's also the same person saying it. The next Mishneh, Mishneh Dalet, says, Hu ha'ya omer. He, Gamliel, continued to say, Asay ritzaynoi kitzaynecha, kedei sheyaseh ritzayncha kitzaynoi. And this is a little bit of what we said. We also said this is also a little bit of a repeat of something we had in the first Perek. He says, you treat somebody else. The regular pshat means do what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants. Asay ritzaynoi is the will. Do the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom, kirtzaynecha, like you would want to do it for yourself. When you're spending money on the Nesrig, use it with the same cheshik and spend the money as if you were buying an object that you like, a car. You're going to buy the little better car, then buy the little better Esrig. You're going to buy a phenomenal car, buy a phenomenal Esrig. Use that same logic as for what you do for yourself, for sure, for the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's one way of looking at it. And also, it's if you do something for somebody else, and you do it with the intentions of just being, when it says that means that you have to love somebody else like you love yourself, which means you have to treat somebody at least as good as you treat yourself. So that person is going to, in that case, do the same thing for you, and he's going to feel it. When something comes with the heart, goes back with the heart. So I say, why? If you give tzedakah and you give it with a full heart, so the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to give you more money, so you should have more tzedakah. So you're going to your ratzon is a full ratzon. He will give you back the same ratzon with you. He's going to give you back and pay you back in spades. The Rebbeinu Shalom pays back unbelievable. And in the same way, you should nullify your ratzon for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Many times you want to do something. You want to take a trip, But you realize if you take a trip, that right now your children will suffer. They need you now. Don't take this trip. Give the time to your children. There's no greater gift you can give your children more than time. That is batel with soin chum. You need a vacation. It's true. You're working hard, but if you take this vacation and your son is going to suffer because of that, or your daughter, don't take it now. Find a time that you could take it. Everybody deserves and should take vacation, actually. But at everything has its time and moment. So you should mavatal your ratzon for the ratzon of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants generations to continue. You should take these generations and give them everything that you have, so that they can in the future give their children the same thing, and they'll see it, they feel it, and they'll want to give the same thing to their children because that's how they grew up. For the same reason, your ratzon should be mavatal for the Rebbeinu Shalom. Your ratzon, the Rebbeinu Shalom's ratzon should be, if what happens is, if you're going to give it to your child, to your son, you're going to, instead of going out at night, you're learning with him, you're going to find, people go to weddings. There were times when it's kufa in everybody's life where all their friends are making bar mitzvahs, or all their friends are making weddings. But you're going to find that everybody, every night, you're going to have one or two, or at least twice a week. And it's kids suffer. First, make sure your kids are that before you leave the house, things are taken care of. You study with them, you learn with them, you do whatever you have to do. And after that, you can go a little bit late to your chuppah, do whatever you're going to have to do. Because at the end of the day, it's going to come back for you. The Ritzayin is going to come back for you. Now, to come back to the first Mishneh that we said, I'm going to just finish with a very, very interesting story that I had seen. That there was a fellow, a Jewish architect. This goes back about 200 years in Europe, and he never had formal training, but he had, even from the Gemara, by the way, if you learn Eruvin, if you learn certain Masechtas, you have a very good idea of architecture. It gives you all the things that you would need to know, the tools that you would need to know for architecture. And he was an exceptional architecture, but he only built in the ghetto, in the Jewish area. One day, the king had this unbelievable palace, absolutely stunning, but it was very not functional. The queen hated it because every room was in the wrong place. The kitchen was very far from the dining room. It was beautiful, but the problem was, by the time the food got to the dining room, it was cold. The children's room was very close to where they entertained. So when people used to come in to be entertained, kids couldn't go to sleep, or the kids made noise and it bothered the thing, so the kids were told to be quiet. So it was a very unfunctional palace, and he couldn't take it, and his wife couldn't take it, and he decided to destroy it and build all over again. And all over the country, he sent anybody that gives me a plan for this palace, I am going to reward him handsomely. And architect after architect submitted plans, but they all basically wanted to build something fancy so it should look good for them, not so much for the king. So they were doing the same thing. They weren't concentrating on the comfort of the king. What happened was, he also came, and he never wrote plans. He just went as he went along. He used his mind, his own ideas, but never formally put them down on paper because he never had formal training on how to write plans. So what happened was, he comes to the palace and he says, I'm an architect. She says, wait, just give me the plans. I don't have plans. My plans are in my head. So they started to laugh, and so they sent him home. So he said, no, they sent him home. Sure enough, the king goes, and he says, I can't believe there's not one architect in the whole country was there every architect come to me? So they said, no, there was one Jewish guy who came. It was a joke. He came. He could have plans in my head, and then we sent them home. The king was upset. He said, first, you should have asked me, and second of all, I'd like to see what he has to say. And he comes, and the king invites him, and he comes to the palace, and he tells the king, let me ask you a question. Can I just walk through the palace first that you have now? He walks through the palace. And then he turns to the king and to the queen. He said, I'd like to speak to the queen, and I'd like to understand exactly what bothers you about this, because it is a beautiful thing, but there's a lot of things that bother me, and I would like to know if it's the same thing that bothers you. And the queen starts to explain all the problems. And the king starts to explain all the problems. And the king is getting very impressed because he realizes that he doesn't want to do something for himself. He wants to build a house that's functional for the king and beauty. Sure enough, He takes him, he hires him, and he does everything exactly as the king and queen want. But the king ordered specific, very expensive glass. He wanted to have magnificent windows. He couldn't find a glazier. He went all over the country looking for this glazier, and finally he found one that he was satisfied with. But this guy was a big anti-Semite. But he had no choice. So he decided he's going to use him. So he goes and he hires him, and he did a magnificent job. He did a magnificent job, and sure enough, the king is delighted. And he pays him handsomely. This guy couldn't take it. The glazier couldn't take it. So what happened was, after everything was about 6 months, it died down, he went over to the king and said, I want you to know something. He says, you don't realize that the Jew is all about money. He says, now, he was approached already by a number of kings, it wasn't true, to build a palace that was like yours, because they're all so impressed with this palace. He says, he's going to do the same thing for other people. You're not going to be special. Now, you tell that to any king, a guy for sure, this is all he needs. She says, well, you have any ideas? He says, yeah. He says, if I were you, I would take him and dump him in the ocean. And the king is happy. So they pick him up, this guy, one day, and he has no idea what's going on. And they take him out. No woman. Before this happened, the guy who was in charge of all the money, the secretary of treasury, was in prison. So he asked the king, why did you put him in, he asked around why he was put in prison. So he said he was put in prison because he said something that was a good secretary of treasury. It was an excellent one. But why was he put in prison then? He said he said something stupid to the king, and the king was so upset he threw him into prison. So when the king asked him what reward he wants, he said, I don't need money. I'll live comfortable. I want you to free this guy. He says, are you kidding me? After what he did to me, but I promised you anything, I'll do that. But you sure you don't want any money? He says, no, don't pay me. Just free him. So of course, and they give him back his position. He's a good secretary of treasury. So he got back his position, and when this guy was arrested and wanted to be thrown into the ocean, Secretary of Treasury was very upset, of course, because he freed him and he would have never been out of prison. And also he realized he was a good man. So he made a plan that he hired somebody who's going to take him out in the boat into the prison to take him to a small island to hide him. And I read this in a sefer that was written by, I think, Vadia Yosef. So it's not some story that's out of the... So he says, and he hit him on an island. Sure enough, what happened was that Secretary of Treasury, about 4 or 5 months later, what happened was the king went swimming and he lost his ring. He lost his ring, and at that point, the Secretary of Treasury turned to the king and he said, well, must have happened when you were swimming. So the king, in his, he said, he got upset again. You accusing me of losing it? Somebody must have stolen it. So he said, you know what? He says, if you don't give me back that ring, you got a week to bring back this ring. If not, I'm gonna do the same thing to you like I did to the builder. He was your friend, so you deserve the same thing. So he goes and he doesn't know what to do. So he goes, he visits his friend who he knew on the small island, this Jewish builder, and he says, I have a big problem. So sure enough, like the Goynish makes the makkah before. And these stories, when they say it, it sounds so odd, but apparently written in a sefer, not Feitzover, he says it's a serious sefer. And he says, I want you to know that I actually caught a fish. And in the fish, it was the king's ring. And I knew it was the king's ring. I recognized it. He says, and I have it. So the guy says, but let's take care. Let's play this smart. This is what they did. It's unbelievable. The dance goes, first of all, to show as close as he got to the king, he did everything he wanted. The other guy also. But the king, in a whim, can throw a guy in the sea, can throw another guy in prison for saying something stupid, even though he's an excellent Secretary of Treasury. And this is what Rabbi Gamliel is saying over here. So just to finish the story, he says, he says, I want you to row me back on land and put me on the floor on the beach. And sure enough, the people find him on the beach, and he's making believe like he just came out of the water and he's coughing and everything like that. And they take him to the king. And the king says, what are you doing here? He says, Your Majesty, he says, I want to tell you something. He says, after you threw me in the ocean, there's one fish in the ocean that's the king. Everything has a king. A fish also have a king. And this king heard about your palace, and he told me, I'll help you stay on the water, and I want you to build a palace for me. This is the story he told this stupid king. And he says, and the king can't believe it. She says, yeah, but he says, he says, well, proof of everything is that I have your ring. In fact, it came into the ocean when you were swimming, And the rule is that the fish have to bring it to the king. They brought the ring to the king, and here's the ring, and here's your ring back. So now he already realized that the guy's probably saying the truth. So the guy says, okay, but what do you need? Why are you here now? He says, because I finished the palace and all I need is windows. And the guy who made your windows is the only guy that can finish the windows in the palace under the sea. So he says, the king is demanding, and the king of the sea is demanding that I take this guy with the windows and put him in the sea so that he should finish the windows. And sure enough, this king, stupid as he was, went and the guy realized the guy with the window. That's how he got his end. Just to show over here. But the main point of this story is, I know it sounds like almost like a fairy tale, but at the end of the day, I saw it in the Sefer that was a serious Sefer. And he says, be careful every time you do something, anybody, a politician, they accomplish, you have to accomplish, and eventually the Rebbeinu Shalom will pay you back for being like we said before, anybody does for the klal, the Rebbeinu Shalom protects you. But if you're doing it for your power and you get closer to the king, at the end you're going to suffer. So this I'll finish. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you. And I'm sorry for starting so late.
Thank you so much.